Well, I'm back here at Yellowstone Lake. It snowed last night. I'm going to do some more videoing on the Book of Mormon here at the Yellowstone Lake. Look at the incredible lichen on that log, that old tree. That is really something. Let me sit here and I'll tell you about the Lehiyanites. The Lehiyanites are an interesting group. Let's see if I got this right. Yeah, that's about right. The wind may blow my hat off again. This is Lynn M. Hilton and Hope A. Hilton, discovering Lehi, new evidence of Lehi and Nephi in Arabia. And what they say is extremely interesting in light of Lehi. Now, in Doctrine and Covenants 33 verse 8, when the Lord advised the new elders to be like Nephi of old, it is, we allege, as if the Lord were saying, you already know the story of Nephi's wonderful mission in the wilderness, so follow the example. Was Nephi a missionary? There can be no doubt about it. He was obviously righteous. In fact, he was almost a righteous prig of a person in a way. He was almost overly righteous. He almost overdid it with his brothers, it seemed, in the record. There was certainly sibling rivalry. The Hiltons note the Lehiyanites, the people of Lehi. This is chapter 8. Pages, there's a lot of pages here, starting on page 77, 78, 79, 80, so on and so forth. The Lehiyanites were a group of ancient Arab tribes that took on the name Lehi. They called themselves the Lehiyanites in Saudi Arabia. They rose to prominence from about 550 BC to about 200 BC, almost a 400-year reign. They influenced the history of Arabia. They arose to prominence from the Dedanites at about the same time that Nephi and Lehi were in the Arabian desert, in just that area where the Lehiyanites arose to prominence. It's a fascinating conjecture that perhaps these people were converts of Lehi and Nephi, whom they met and converted in the wilderness. That possibility is very real based on we have these Lehiyanites. Their descendants are still alive today in Saudi Arabia. It's fascinating. They say they rose to political prominence in the 5th century BC from the former Dedan civilization. Their name Lehyan, L-I-H-Y-A-N, means in English, the people of Lehi. Lehi is a real desert personal name. It's fascinating. The archaeological remains of this rich, powerful people lie today astride Lehi's presumed ancient trail. They're even in the right place, and they're in the right time, and they have the right name to them. Fascinating. We propose that they adopted Father Lehi's name and handed it down to us in the form of Lehi, L-I-H-Y, and Lehyan, L-I-H-Y-A-N. The Greeks spelled this name Lehi, L-I-H-Y. However, Oliver Cowdery spelled it L-E-H-I, Lehi. It is the same name. They were 300 years of kings. They built temples. They had an entire civilization in the Arabian desert. And he says on page 79, he says, the Saudi Department of Antiquities has approximated a date for the rise of Dedan against Midian and other neighboring tribes to the start of the first millennium BC, and Dedan was an important and powerful commercial center by the 6th century BC when Lehi and Nephi arrived in their borders at Al-Bad. Later, after the fall of Dedan, the Lehiyanites built their capital on top of Dedan. The Leon ruin is called Al-Kiriba. This is on page 80. The ancient inscriptions left in northern Arabia, the archaeologists Winnett and Reed were able to conclude that the Lehiyanites succeeded the Dedanites in ruling. So we actually have a real people. There were 3 periods of the Lehiyanite culture. Ruins, inscriptions, and historical documents allow us to identify 3 different periods. The Old Lehian Kingdom was 500 to 200 BC. Then the Lehian son of Hudale arose in the 6th century AD, and now we have the modern descendants of Lehian in the 20th century AD. These people still exist in Arabia. The Hiltons met them. They talked with them. They learned all about their ancestors and their traditions. Winnet dates early Lehiyanite inscriptions to the 5th century BC and one Lehiyanite inscription specifically to 444 BC and continues on to the 3rd century BC. The most recent report on Lehian dating comes from Dr. Abdul Rahman Al-Ansari. He's the professor of archaeology at King Saud University, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. In his paper, The Chronology of Lehian, he considers not only the dating by Winnet, but also by Caskell, Grimm, Albright, and Vanden Branden. The paper concludes the Lehian chronology of Winnet is still the most satisfactory one. The Lehiyanite kingdom dates from the middle of the 5th century BC, 550 BC, to the beginnings of the 3rd century BC, that is to 200 BC. The Lehiyanites ruled from approximately 500 to 200 BC. That's on page 83. They show the actual situation. They actually show where they ruled. Right there, there's the Gulf of Aqaba. Right there. And that gray area, this gray area right here, is their ruling area. Right where Lehi was said to have gone. That's fascinating that we even have the correct place where they ruled, in Al-Bad. He says, I'm going to skip and jump here a little bit. The problem with the Lehian culture, on page 84, in the case of the Lehian, few Jewish Bible scribes wrote during this interval. Thus, no Bible records mentions their Arab Lehian neighbors to the south. But these could have been Arabs who converted to the Israel religion by Nephi, Arabs who in due time overthrow the Dedanite king and establish their own dynasty and ruled for 300 years. That's basically how the Arabians described their histories. They had a temple, he says, on page 85, a vessel carved out of red rock. Talks about the Lehian borders in Arabia. On page 87 he says, we were excited to learn that the Lehians were Jewish. If Nephi were converting the local people, he would have taught them Judaism. Christianity did not arrive for another 600 years, but the Lehians were a Jewish people who kept the law of Moses. That's fascinating, isn't it? Not only do we hear that the Lehians may have been Jews at Al-Ais, Professor Vida acknowledged some authorities recognized the presence of Judean elements in the Lehian civilization, but he had his doubts. Also, A.J. Drews reports that in the area of Al-Ula, in addition to Lehionite inscriptions, there were Dedanite, Manaean, Thamudic, Nabatean, Hebrew, and Arabic. So this is very encouraging that the actual place, the personal names of Lehi and Nephi are among the Lehiyanites. Let me read this information for you. In private correspondence in 1983, Dr. Abdullah H. Masri, Assistant Deputy Ministry in the Saudi government and head of the Department of Antiquities and Museums, wrote to us. Here's what he said. It's on page 88. Concerning your question about the derivation of the name Leon, and again whether it goes back to an ancestor figure, we can only reply with caution. Lehi occurs sporadically in ancient Arabic as a personal name. Whether this goes back to an eponymous ancestor, perhaps an ancient Arabian Barbarossa, is not yet known. In early classical Arabic, Leon is known as a personal name and as a place name. So it is confirmed as a personal name. It is considerable weight to note that the words Lehi, L-I-H-Y, and Lehyan, Lihyan,